So why does bread make you fat? But grandma's been eating bread for the last 90 years. She has no health problems, she's in shape, and she feels better than you do. Let's try to explore this and understand why that may be. So here on the left, we have a column representing a sourdough loaf of bread that I found online. There's an actual company selling this bread with these actual ingredients and this actual method of baking it. And these types of loaves, they're not rare at all. There's tons of companies selling them online. You could buy them in most stores like Whole Foods, Sprouts, Wegmans. You could find them at any farmers markets here in New York City, pretty much any farmers market. And this category of breads, these are sourdough loaves that most of the time contain only the ingredients of flour, water, and sea salt, possibly sourdough starter as well. So this one contains einkorn flour. What is einkorn flour? Einkorn is thought to be the original wheat that humans began to consume as bread. It grew wild in the Fertile Crescent, so it was a wild plant, and it's never been crossbred, it's never been hybridized, it's never been bred to produce a high yield for the farmers. It's never been bred to be resistant to pesticide, to take up less space, to grow larger and produce more of the actual wheat kernels that are used for bread. It's never been crossbred for any of that stuff. And so for the last 3,000 years, this wild einkorn flour has remained in the same genetic state that our ancestors found it in the Fertile Crescent. What does this mean? It means we've adapted to it. Our gut is used to it. It's used to processing it. It's used to processing the gluten in it, the anti-nutrients in it, and everything else in it. Because over a period of hundreds, if not thousands of generations, we've adapted to eating this. This loaf is also sourdough. That means that it was fermented and it was naturally leavened. Now you'll notice sourdough starter is not part of the ingredients. That's because you can actually make a loaf of sourdough by just leaving it out in the air, and it'll use the wild bacteria in the air around it to become a sourdough and to ferment. Lactic acid bacteria. So you can make a sourdough with a starter, you can make a sourdough without a starter, literally just using the bacteria in the air. And this fermentation process of actually making a bread into a sourdough takes 2 to 3 days. The bacteria pre-digest the bread, making it easier on your digestive system. They diminish the amount of anti-nutrients in the bread, such as phytic acid, which can bind to minerals in the body, making them unusable. And fermentation diminishes the amount of gluten in the bread as well, if that's a concern for you. Gluten is a plant protein. It could be hard to break down for some people with a sensitive gut, like myself. And some people make a point saying that all the bacteria die when you bake the sourdough. And this is actually true. Bacteria die at quite a low temperature. They start dying at around 160 degrees Fahrenheit. Some start to die as low as 110. So it doesn't take much. But what you get in sourdough is a thing called paraprobiotics, which are essentially probiotics which were alive at one point but were killed now through a process of heat and cooking. And these paraprobiotics, the byproducts, they have beneficial properties of their own. Most importantly, these types of breads, einkorn flour, water, sea salt, spelt flour, any type of flour, these three ingredient breads, this is the only type of bread that people used to eat. There was no such thing as using a yeast to quickly make the bread rise within a matter of hours. There were no additional ingredients, they simply weren't invented, or people didn't have access to them. There was only one way to make bread, and this was the way to make it. And nowadays, it's the exception. Bread was never considered to be uh, causing people to get fat, causing people to become chronically ill, causing health issues, because it was simply flour, water, and salt. and that's a far cry from what it is today. So let's take a look at what people think is healthy. When you go to a store, you skip the Wonder Bread, you skip the Perry Ridge or whatever it's called, and you go to the organic Dave's Killer Bread because that's the healthiest option in the whole store. It's organic, it's non-GMO, it's 100% whole wheat, it has fiber. But let's take a look at the ingredients list. So the first ingredient you'll find is the organic whole wheat. And in the US, if something is USDA organic, it's by default non-GMO. But this whole wheat that they're using is a far cry from non-GMO. Although it might fit the guidelines, these strains of wheat, these species, have been bred thousands of times for them to provide the biggest possible yield of crops to the farmer, take up the least amount of space, be the most resilient to glyphosate and other pesticides. Although they're not allowed to use glyphosate in organic, they are allowed to use other pesticides. They're bred to yield the most amount of kernels per plant for use of the actual bread making. And the genetics of this whole wheat are a far, far cry from what our ancestors were eating even 5, 10 generations ago. Humans don't evolve that fast. We're simply not able to process this, and it damages our gut. It causes leaky gut permeations in the epithelial lining of the wall. Our body's not used to it, it's not able to process it, and it attacks the gut. But let's look at some of the other ingredients besides the wheat itself. Organic cane sugar is in there, for palatability, of course. Organic wheat gluten, strangely enough. Expeller pressed canola oil, of course. I don't know why. Yeast, because it's not a sourdough and they need to make sure the bread rises quick. These companies are making these loaves for a profit. They don't have 2 to 3 days to let the bread rise as a sourdough naturally. They have to use yeast to rise it within a matter of hours. Molasses, vinegar, strangely, and acerola cherry powder. Sesame flour, enzymes. Grandma wasn't eating acerola cherry powder. Grandma wasn't eating expeller pressed canola oil. Grandma was eating a hard, possibly stale loaf of bread, but at least it was only made with flour, water, and salt. As I mentioned before, this organic whole wheat, they say it's organic and non-GMO, but it's been crossbred, hybridized, modernized throughout thousands of generations of wheat plants. All the ingredients used in here are foreign to our gut. They attack it. They cause an immune response because the immune system and the gut are closely linked together. Hormone responses in the gut are closely linked together. And overall, this affects us in many ways outside the gut as well. And keep in mind, this is the best option you're going to find at a store. When people go to the store and they choose Dave's bread, oftentimes they're choosing the most expensive and the healthiest option in there. What are their options besides that? Well, we could take a look. If I move this over, let's go to ShopRite and search bread. So here's their fresh bakery bread. I mean, I'm assuming these are the high-end options. So let's take a look here. We have this freshly sprouted wheat. It's organic, kosher. And keep in mind here, you're also choosing the healthy option when you're buying this and paying $7, which is more than what I would pay for a loaf like the Einkorn one at the local Union Square market. So what you're getting here is sprouted organic whole wheat berries, filtered water, wheat gluten, dates, wheat starch, raisins, yeast, and sunflower lecithin. So here we have the typical crossbred, hybridized GMO wheat, which our body is not used to breaking down. Wheat starch, strangely. Yeast, it's not a sourdough, meaning you have all those anti-nutrients. The bread's not pre-digested. You have to consume the yeast itself, and sunflower lecithin, which is an ingredient made in the 1960s when people started pressing seed oils as well. And this is the healthy option too. And I'm wondering where the options are where you kind of just go in and find it. So this kind of looks like packaged bread. So when your mom is going to the grocery store and shopping, she's probably buying something like this. Something that looks like this Arnold 100% whole wheat. Oh look, it supports digestive health. Bulgur wheat, sugar, vegetable oil, soybean oil, yeast, soy lecithin, grain vinegar, natural flavors, citric acid, which is a preservative. I mean, this is awful. And it gets worse. What about when you get to the Wonder Bread? Maybe something that looks like this white bread. Now we're starting with the enriched wheat flour, where they're giving you inorganic forms of iron, other vitamins, sugar, whey, vegetable oil, soy lecithin, citric acid, wheat gluten. So this is why bread is making us sick. Is it the bread or is it the ingredients they're using to make the bread? Can this stuff even be classified as bread? If we have bread here, let's zoom in on this again. If we have bread over here, a 2 to 3 day process involving a wild form of flour that was found in the Fertile Crescent 3,000 years ago, water and sea salt, and natural bacteria in the air to make it rise, how can we consider this Dave's Killer to be bread? It's not, it's something else that's crafted from a whole different concoction of ingredients. You can't say that it's the bread making you unhealthy, it's whatever these ingredients are formed into an amalgamation of some sort that's making you unhealthy. So hopefully that scratches the surface of what's going on today. And yeah.